Welcome back to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. In this episode, I welcome Clifton Harness back to the podcast. He's the co-founder and CEO of TestFit, but of course, that's not where his journey in our industry began. Clifton has been obsessed with building things from a very early age. During his education, while obtaining his Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Texas at Austin, he was the first B-Arch to obtain certifications from the McCombs School of Business in business and in real estate. And after graduation, Clifton joined Streetlights Residential, a Dallas-based real estate development company. Prior to starting TestFit, Clifton worked with college roommate Ryan Greege after work and on weekends, and their work would become Residential Engine, which was the precursor to TestFit. Clifton is based in Dallas, where he continues his passion for improving AECO with technology, which we get into quite a bit in today's episode. In this special partner episode, we cover the founding story of the company, the decision to pursue technology over traditional architecture, the missing elements of the design process that led to the development of TestFit, TestFit as a co-creation tool, the impact of AI on site selection, design optimization, and pro forma valuation, TestFit's unique approach and value proposition, the difference between generative design and TestFit's optimization solver, benefits for players in a development deal, multifamily market trends, the recent investment from Prologis, upcoming developments for the TestFit platform, and an upcoming webinar on AI in real estate and industrial real estate. The webinar is October 26th at noon Central Time, which we didn't mention in the episode, so I'm mentioning it here now. Again, that's October 26th at noon Central Standard Time. There's a link in the show notes to register for the webinar. This was a great, wide-ranging conversation with Clifton, and I want to express my sincere thanks to TestFit for partnering with me to make this episode possible. So, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Clifton Harness. Well, welcome back. It's great to see you again. It's been a while since we've talked.
Yeah, it really has. I think Ian maybe was the last time, wasn't it? Or...
That's right. There was a combo episode, you and Ian. Yeah, that was probably even a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago at this point. I'll have to put a link to that one in the show notes. But yeah, it's been a while. So, and you guys have been on a tear. I've talked to several people, test fitters. I've talked to Nat McDonald and Kyle Bernhardt. It's been, a flurry of development going on over there. And so I think maybe before we get into the topic of being AI ready, let's talk about your story and just where you saw a hole in the market. I know you've talked about this before. I remember joining onto one of your YouTube live streams when you were doing a comparison, a straight across comparison of what you used to do in AutoCAD, right? Laying out
that
multifamily and you we just did like this live commentary session on YouTube where you just let the stream run while you did the thing in AutoCAD and then you did it in TestFit. And I don't think I joined during the TestFit part. I think I joined during the AutoCAD part when you were laying out units and mirroring and copying and arraying and doing all that kind of stuff and counting and making sure you had the right number of them and all this kind of stuff. And I just remember that being really fun. But talk about what the hole was that you saw, the pain that you saw in the industry, to talk about how TestFit came to be.
Yeah, so I've done the founding story like a million times, So it's like, what's the right flavor, and I love talking on Troxel because I get to talk to architects, in a way that I don't really get to anywhere else. And so I'll go back to some of my first internships in architecture and kind of, what responsibilities do you give an intern? Well, not many, not deep responsibilities. And oftentimes it's going to be in, schematic design or concept design, even where the stakes aren't that high. I worked for a firm for a summer and then I'd go back and get lunch with a partner or something, during the fall or in the spring and say, how do those projects pan out? And I'm not a normal architecture kid. I'm fighting for internships like in high school, with firms that are like, there's an email me sending Ted Flato an cold email, like, "Hey Ted, I'd love to work for you. I'm a architect in, junior year of high school, no skills or anything." But I say that to encourage, young people, start young, go network, and you'll learn about projects, and you'll learn the stories that, like, how real projects to get born, like how they came to be. And I always pursued mentors that had successfully built, big buildings and stuff. And I'd work for them too. And just the thing that always drove me nuts was, like, we would throw away all of this work that we would spend, like, the whole summer working on. Like, it was some working for Overland Partners, they get to do these really fun projects, and it was like a golf clubhouse. And I spent, an ungodly amount of hours, like, laying out furniture and how you put,
right.
And it, just didn't proceed. And it felt like such a downer, even at these incredible firms, we get to put all our heart, body, mind, and soul into design, and it just gets, tossed. So I felt that in the high design realm. And then when I worked my way down into, the commodity world, part of my story is my dad's a real estate developer. He's a commodity guy. He's a garden apartment guy. And so I grew up around that. And this is why I went to high design, or in my early career, is like, I was just like, I don't want to be a part of that. That's crazy. Like, you're just slapping stuff up without, you're not building contextually. You're not, you breaking all the rules in new urbanism that they're teaching me in school. But you eventually get to a place where it crystallizes in your head, like, okay, there is waste happening, not just with architects, but like with developers and with the GCs and with the vendors and with the manufacturers. And, if you want to get the right curtain wall done for a big building, the faster you order that thing, the earlier you get it in the queue, the higher probability it's going to show up on site. Yeah. And so, yeah, you see the ability to reduce risk by making big decisions early and like staying committed to those decisions. Mm-hmm. And the best of them, the guys that are doing the $150 million, towers that I was fortunate enough to work for, they make decisions very quickly, and they have a very, very robust system for how they make decisions. And, this is all in an effort to reduce risk and eliminate waste. And they still spend, millions a year on A&E fees on projects that don't move forward. So yeah, that is the problem statement, man. Is SD doesn't really pay the bills, and if we're going to build an AI today, let's attack something that isn't very profitable in firms.
Mm-hmm. So when you think back about this story, I mean, you're talking kind of about your personal story. Let's talk about the tech side of that story. So, I mean, a lot of interns are hired as CAD operators back in the day, or maybe BIM operators today, or maybe SketchUp, drivers today, or whatever it is, whatever the tool of choice is for that office. And depending on the phase of the project that they're working in, it could be all three of those, right? It could be one or the other. Talk about what you experienced in that, because I think this also just helps paint the picture of where TestFit was born, right? And then ultimately why you decided to pursue a technology path in AEC versus another role in a more traditional sense.
All right, so it's two questions. I'm gonna answer the first question. You're gonna have to remind me of the second question. So the first question is really like, the tools that I was using and and how was I leveraging them, and then, maybe I'm going to infer the next bit, which is like, how did that influence what the TestFit app looks like today? Mm-hmm. And then there's also the technical aspect, was like, I'm not a coder, but how did we get here? Right.
Yeah. Right.
And then there's the other half of it, which is, I'm not going to remember the second half of the question. So let's start with,
there we go. Start there.
Let's start with the first bit. So I learned that the more that you could leverage lots of kinds of tools, the more effective your workflows could be, and the more powerful you could, get work done. So AutoCAD for me was always the most effective 2D drafting tool to get, roughly the size of the thing that I needed. Right. I'm not going to use any other tool to do that. But I'm not going to use AutoCAD to create 3D massing. So you'd export that and you go into SketchUp and you'd build out your massing tool. And then somewhere along the way, someone at Autodesk decided to put like a tabulation Lisp routine that kind of works, but doesn't really work with using, polylines. And so, you figure out this really archaic way of extracting all the data you need into an Excel table. And then you're doing the same thing in SketchUp. You're kind of checking what the AutoCAD math was for the SketchUp math. And so you have Excel. So really, my 3D modeling tool was SketchUp. My 2D modeling tool was AutoCAD. And then, my database was Excel. Mm-hmm. And when I was communicating some of these problems to Ryan Grieg, my co-founder, CTO, college roommate, groomsman, we're almost neighbors now, my buddy. He was like, this is great. Okay, you got all these components. He kind of distilled it down. You've got like a 2D thing, a 3D thing, and a data thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we endeavored to build was, kind of the strengths of those three apps without all of like the extra garbage that came with it. And that's what we built initially that, had sort of 2D interaction that was reminiscent of AutoCAD. And then in 3D, it was sort of this push-pull thing from inspired by SketchUp. But then, we started getting our customer feedback of our own, and, it was like, thanks for generating a building for me, but I would like to edit this crappy thing that you generated for me. Like this thing is 80% of what I want. I just want to do, minor adjustments to this thing. So, then it was like, all right, what, we like the block grip, tool in AutoCAD. So we'll put some grips and, the sort of manual editing tool. And, now there's Illustrator and Figma. There's all these other tools out there that you can point to, like who have really great grips, so, yeah, we're not like trying to reinvent the development process. We're trying to take, who has the best grip out there, and we're going to try to do a grip, Yeah. And so we did this sort of manual edit tool, and oh my gosh, the architects, they loved it. And when we finally got analytics in the app, 40%, I think, of generated models have edits done to them, so it's obviously got product market fit inside our ecosystem. So yeah, that's, the architecture component, that's like, thanks for generating this thing, but I really would like to manipulate, at a lower level and craft, what this thing is going to be. Yeah. And there was a second half of that question, Evan. I don't quite remember what it was.
Well, I mean, before we get that, I think one of the things that you've talked about in the past, and I don't remember if it was on this show or if it was elsewhere, but I know you've brought it up a lot, is that the idea of TestFit being a co-creation tool, which is exactly what you're talking about right now with editability. And you've talked about technology's role. It's important that it stay a co-creation tool and not just do all of the things for, it's not just a push button solution, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the, in some of the worst possible cases, like some customers want a single click button, that does everything. And you kind of ask them why. And they tell you, well, I get really frustrated when the developer says this, and then I don't know about this, and the money comes in at the pricing, and I just want everything to, I just want to manage the design process or something. Yeah. And the way that I read that is like the design process is literally so overwhelming to be placed on the shoulders of one person, and that's the architect these days. Like the level of constraints that you have being poured onto you. It's, it's not just building code, it's not zoning code. There's other things that you have to consider on top of that are not objective. Like there's design, like the basic component to design is that you can't really, objectively describe the subjective of the building,
Right.
And so do I think that, using AI or co-creation or any sort of automation tools to assist in that process absolutely is valuable. But what is different, I think, from how TestFit's approaching AI is that, like, we're never just going to let the AI tell us what the building needs to be. Like, you can click a button, you can generate a building from a preset, but that's to get the user started. It's not to say this is, what TestFit has found to be the highest and best use. Like, an AI cannot do that. Humans are the only judge of what highest and best use really is.
There's a component to architecture that you're talking about here, which is like, what is space like? And so we're not talking about the envelope. We're not talking about the program. We're not talking about the efficiency of the layout and, the circulation and the corridor ratios to this and that. But we're talking about spatial quality, and AI does not know spatial quality at all. Right. And that's where the experience and the wisdom of spending a long time in the profession of architecture and in school and, that progression that humans have through that timeline starts to pay off at some point. And some are better at it than others. Right. But that's the kind of thing that it's this abstraction. It's where the architecture often is the thing that is not a component of the design. It is the space. It is not the walls. It is not the floors. It is not the ceilings. It's not the roofs. It's not the structure. It's the thing in between all that. And it is interesting to me to hear people say, I want a push button solution. It's like, well, you're not going to get architecture necessarily out of a push button solution.
No,
it comes from that editing process. It comes from that wisdom and that knowledge of what it's actually like to progress through space and the emotion and the mood and solving those kind of, those wicked design problems that are not something that can be broken down into an algorithm.
Yeah. Overland Partners, again, is this firm in San Antonio. They're so instrumental in kind of my thinking about design, because I started working there just so early in my life. And like, they have these values for buildings, and buildings should be strategic, systemic, sustainable, beautiful, meaningful, contextual, experiential. Like, buildings should be all of those things. They should be, right? Like, no one in the architecture profession would fight me when I say, like, buildings should be that, right? But the tools that we use to get there are, trace paper, really. Like, we are so good at specializing in typology and morphology specific buildings, but we don't build on the history of what those, what the designers before us have done with those buildings and why. And when I think about neural net AI, that has just totally exploded since the last time we talked, on this podcast, but, how is neural net AI going to actually start generating geometry in AEC? I don't know. Like, TestFit's procedural. We write with human intention every single algorithm that goes into this thing. Procedural, human controlled. And we can kind of guide our AIs to try to deliver the best possible building if we could. Right. But what I know about neural nets today is they train on existing material, right? They train on what is out in the world today.
Yep.
Okay. So if we train a neural net to design a building from what exists out in the world today, it's just going to be a thing that displays all of the compromises from all of the other buildings that were designed previously. So like,
it's like
if a building
designed incest, man.
Yeah.
You just continually water it down, water it down, water it down.
Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of, I'm not too, I'm not too worried about the architect losing their position in this world with AI coming. Cause it, like the strength of a designer is to bring clarity to a design problem with other humans in the room. And there was a guy posting on LinkedIn today about how terrible that it is that TestFit generates terrible looking buildings. And I'm like, okay, yeah, man, isn't it terrible that architects design and create terrible buildings every day too? Like, right. At least these are ones done virtually and 95% of them are thrown away. Like, like we're saving the architect that time so they can focus on the 5% they're going to proceed.
Yeah. Back to your point.
And so that's the role of AI today.
I was just going to say, back to your point of attacking the problem where the most waste happens, right? Like that, you want to get to a spot where you can push it forward as fast as possible so that the chances go way up of it actually happening.
Yeah, firm leadership today is mired in project feasibility, and they don't really have time to care about process and stuff downstream. They're trying to win work.
Yeah.
It's incredibly important to improve this part of the process. Like, actually, let me rephrase that. It's incredibly important to improve any part of the AEC design process if you can. There's so much like meat on that bone that, TestFit, for all intents and purposes, like we've basically automated the drawing of parking. Like that's our contribution, to some of these firms. And it's a huge business. We've raised a lot of money, like guys, like there's other low hanging fruit out there that, other startups can go attack.
Yeah. Yeah. So my second question to you that I'm reminding you about now was about choosing the path of going technology versus more traditional path in architecture. And you've already spoken to some of those, I think, pieces, but what really solidified it for you that this was how you were going to move forward in the AEC industry was actually developing software, raising money, building a team, selling it to people versus, becoming an architect of buildings?
Yeah. So I had it in my mind in early undergrad that I was going to be like B.R. Kingles or, basically him. Yeah, that was my, just
that was your aspiration.
Starchitect, model. But then when I got into practice, I started to realize that the times where I was expending my intrinsic motivation, the stuff that I was neither being carroted or sticked towards, was building tools of my own. Little calculators that helped. Like in my first job, I was doing code review, calculating, the areas of rooms, getting the life safety yield, and just built a little calculator in Excel that made my job like 30 times faster. And, basically went home early that day because they didn't have enough work, because I get billed by the hour. So I made a tool that made myself obsolete. It was great. Yeah. So moving into like actual practice, I was working in development. I was writing Lisp routines to generate unit layouts based off of like bounding box. I was only allowed to have AutoCAD. So everybody's like, hey, why do you like, I was like, well, they didn't want me to use Revit. So I was a 2D workflow. Dynamic blocks is like this parametric system in AutoCAD that's rather powerful if you're into 2D modeling and you don't need to use BIM. So I was always really excited about the tools and making tools. And, I had kind of an 80-20 rule that I could spend, 20% of the time automating. And, if I had spent all of Monday automating, then by Tuesday I had to start actually working on the project because it was due Friday. And so you eventually get to a place where your tools are so powerful that you're done with like all of your work by Tuesday. And I got there at Streetlights. I mean, it took a while, but every tool in the book I was using, every Lisp routine I could update. 7,000 blocks with a list routine overnight. When I left, I think the guy I worked for was like, yeah, we had to hire 4 or 5 people to come in and figure out what you did. I was like, yeah, I told you. I was like, I warned you. Yeah. So the reason to go to software is like, my passion was the tools. My passion wasn't to create, the architecture. Like, I think eventually I might find architecture to be my passion again, as a person that is, understands that it takes probably 30 years to really be a competent architect. Like, this is my first, 10 years is trying to automate parking. It's a great contribution to the industry.
It is. And so let's just take let's pause here and talk about, because believe it or not, there are people who are listening to this episode right now. And I'm also talking to certain audience members who have never heard of TestFit before. I mean, so most people are going, everybody's heard of TestFit, but I'm here to tell you they haven't. So tell us exactly what TestFit, like at the current snapshot, is, because I'm not even sure everybody knows what TestFit currently does. We all have kind of an idea of maybe what it's like. You've talked about parking, but it's doing a lot of things now. So maybe you can just kind of break down at a high level overview of what the tool is doing.
Yeah. So I'll do the practical impact statement, and then I'll go into the sort of theory pitch maybe. So we are a real estate feasibility tool for multifamily and industrial buildings, mostly in the United States or IBC compliant markets. Our software generates site plans for those building types, for those morphologies. Industrials, got 15 different subtypes of buildings that like warehouses are actually fairly robust in the kinds of things that they do. And then in multifamily, we can generate, probably from, I'd say probably 4 units to the acre is probably the lowest sort of density, up to 500 units to the acre towers. And we might be the first to get to sort of product market fit in housing in the United States, meaning that we've got enough AI that we can do all the different segments of density and multifamily that housing firms can get a lot of use out of it at every scale. Theory sort of pitch. Our vision is that we'd like to reinvent the real estate development process for the betterment of our future communities. We think that land isn't particularly valued as highly as it should be, and I think through years of effort, and sort of improving the AI behind highest and best use, we'll be able to give humans a better idea about what they can do with land earlier and with more clarity.
So is that the driving force behind why you want to reinvent this part of the real estate market? I mean, because to me, it seems like architecture, like a lot of AEC, it hasn't really truly been disrupted. I think now with AI, people are actually questioning, because there's fear that we're going to be disrupted in a major way. And so, I mean, does that make sense to you?
I mean, you want to bring disruption to AEC, change the OAC contract, that there's so little margin in AEC that software vendors aren't going to try to go attack, how you're making profit. The real play here is to get the capital, to get the debt and equity excited about BIM, excited about, the process part of AEC and how we can reduce risk through technology, how we can actually start to string together supply chains and more, prefabrication and lower carbon. Like, if anything, what TestFit can do is to try to bring a window to all of our problems in AEC to other stakeholders. And that's how we've been able to monetize, by working with real estate and working with their architects to find a common ground where they both get a win. I would be worried, like, if I'm an architect in today's world, like I would be worried about AI, but I also would be worried about AI if I was in any other industry. Mm-hmm. TestFit's got a lot of funding, but I'm worried about AI too. Like there's people that are getting funding for ways to generate buildings that aren't the way that we are particularly effective at. So,
right.
So that's interesting to see, what's happening with AI, even in the startup space. I don't think there's going to be a large language model for buildings, honestly. Like, how many petabytes of images were used to train Midjourney compared to how many petabytes are currently in the Procore Construction Cloud? I bet there is an order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude more data about images, just clip art images, than there is construction data. So we simply don't have the quantity, but perhaps TestFit's AI, procedural AI, could start to generate test data that could be used to fill in the gaps between building A and building B. But it's a big, hairy upward battle to even get an AI. Like I've spent 6 years on high density, and we're still finding out ways to make the building more efficient, more compact, and squeeze out gross area. And and it's taken hundreds of customers and thousands of feedback calls. And do I think that AI can pose a threat to that easily? Absolutely not.
I was going to ask you about that thing that you just talked about, which was, you're looking for more efficiencies. You're looking for ways to squeeze things down. And my question was going to be how, and then you started to answer that right now with talking with customers, getting their feedback. And so talk about that a little bit, just because it's not like you just come with the answer. Like TestFit is not just the answer and it stays the answer and it's never going to change. You're constantly updating and manipulating the model so that it's addressing the feedback that you're getting. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that's working.
Yeah. So, I mean, every new line of code that we add changes the app ever so slightly. So if you think 2017 TestFit was it basically only thought that Texas was the only place that you could make buildings, like that was what we had, was a thing that made donuts. Right. And so you add capability. Okay. We got a customer in New Jersey. You know how many podiums they build in New Jersey? Almost everything is a podium in New Jersey. So, we learn about, water retention problems and, needing space for pumps. And, there's, customers in the Midwest, like still they have snow load problems and how they want to heat their garages. Like, TestFit still doesn't fully address part of that problem for them yet. So it's, we're fortunate to be in the US, because in the US you have 50 states that all have these subcultures of sub problems. And, we're fortunate to have, I think, customers in 46 states now. Nice. Across every, all architecture, all development. We got everybody, big, small, medium, and their feedback is pouring into this, one AI that does multifamily.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, the feedback is customers, man. Like,
yeah.
Like we didn't know that much, in 2017, right. But, when you have 6 years of feedback and, Trello cards that make your eyes want to bleed because you haven't been able to do that specific customer feedback in over 5 years, you have a pretty good idea of what your destination looks like from a product roadmap.
Yeah, roadmap. So I remember when we chatted at AU and you were talking to architects, and now I think you've seriously pivoted to real estate, not just design, right? From an architect's kind of, So talk about adoption, because for TestFit, you just said you're in 46 states, you're in a lot of firms, you're in a lot of development offices, I assume. But big picture, would you say that the adoption curve is doing well, or is there just a huge opportunity there still? Because I'm wondering if they're seeing tech serving them well at this point or not. And I would assume not, because that's kind of what you're aiming for.
Yeah. So okay. It's kind of funny because last time we were talking, you had a stable job and I was the startup guy. So now we're totally flipped, I think.
Right.
Product market fit maybe is like the right way to answer this. It's like, if you focus solely on a repeatable sale, like this is not going to be like a fun startup thing to hear for people that want to go do a startup, right? Like this is the dirty part, right? It's like
real talk.
Yeah, real talk. If you want to be successful, you have to figure out a repeatable sales process. Like that's it. Like this is why inferior technology wins all the time. It's like, because some idiot in Texas had an inferior technology, but figured out a repeatable sales process for how to bring a firm in and, respect their problems and show, okay, this is the automation that we can provide. This is our value. This is how we've been selling it. And this is, and we've been able to scale that. Right. I think TestFit's 4.5 times as expensive as Forma. And we're, probably have more customers in the US. There's what other competitor, there's not much out there right now. So when I say things like, any person could just arrive in AEC with something meaningful and put their head down for 4 years and grind on it and keep their focus. Like we never moved away from multifamily until industrial. And that was mid 2020 when industrial was exploding. Like that market went from 2% to 8% in a year. So just staying laser focused on providing like that specific value that you can get that repeatable sales process, you can create that income stream, and then you can go talk to VCs. Say, hey, I've mitigated the risk of this company. Can you help me grow faster? And it boils down to that repeatable sales process in every case. I mean, like, what's the biggest exit we've had in AEC in the last 10 years? Was it the iPad? What is the name of that company that Autodesk bought for $800 million?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it was for doing punch lists, right? The name is escaping me as well, but
Tracy Young. All right, so Tracy founded this company, and you go on LinkedIn, you follow Tracy. All she talks about now is how to build sales teams and how to make a repeatable sales process. And she built this company. It's like to view PDFs of CDs on the iPad and sold it to Autodesk for $800 million. It's like, okay, value prop is simple. We're doing this thing, and we figured out a way to sell it to people. And in their case, they talked to foremen, people on the job site that actually needed to look at construction documents, and they sold it to those people.
Yeah. Architects doing construction administration as well, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's that phase of the project. It's like those are the people at the table in those construction trailer meetings every Tuesday morning at 9, right? Going through all the issues and walking the site together.
It's just amazing, right? Like,
right. So talk about the way that TestFit is using AI, because I don't remember when you started. I mean, you never used the term AI. You talked about algorithms, right? You talked about algorithms all the time. And that was kind of TestFit's secret sauce, was because one thing that you has always had in your favor is how fast TestFit solves, right? And I mean, that probably speaks to Ryan specifically and his skill set and his talent. And so maybe you can talk about kind of your, I'm going to use a startup word, pivot to AI, but just talk about that, because those are they're a little bit synonymous, and sometimes they're at odds with each other, and I think these words leave room for the imagination of how to interpret these.
We pivoted, and I'm using air quotes here for those that are
allergic to startup terminology
to talking about AI when everybody else started talking about AI. So this is our hope is to just not get forgotten, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
and I don't think we will be. Like, it's going to be a while for any of these large language models to be able to do anything like what we're capable of doing today. And yeah, so that's why we're talking about AI is like we are the cutting edge for AEC right now. And if you're going to pay attention to what Midjourney can do for you, well, how about a thing that draws parking spaces? You know, like
something
you know,
you actually need.
One is a bad replacement for Inkscape, and the other is something you might actually need, right?
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about your product overview and how you're solving the pain of your customers, because I think when people don't have TestFit, they do things a certain way, and then they get TestFit, and it's a different way of working, right? But I imagine you get a lot of aha moments when that happens. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the aha moments. You know, there's people stand up in the meeting room and shout and walk out, and I don't know. There's
high
been
fives.
Yeah, there's been all kind, sending us memes, inappropriate memes about wanting more of that and where that came from. We've seen a lot of reactions to seeing the thing in action. Let's talk about 2018. There was this idea that you had to do generative design. You had to generate millions of options, and like you had to saturate the solution space with all possible solutions. And it took, if you want 100% of the solutions, it would take 1,000 times longer to create 100% of the solutions, right? Well, yeah, like to Ryan's credit, like he was like, that's stupid. We can show 80% of the options in like 2% of the amount of time. Like we really can. And you can pre-compute it and you can do all this kind of stuff to get to a place where you can do that. And that was interesting because I was like, all right, so you're saying like maybe we can actually show like the algorithm in real time in action, like if I drag a setback, the building's going to move along with it. Right. He's like, well, I don't know. I wouldn't go that far. Right. Like, but we were able to actually achieve that. And, the thing is like, if you can do that, you can show in real time what the algorithm's doing in a way that if you generated it frame by frame and they had to wait for it, you couldn't. So, I kind of equate it to like, if you're able to do it in real time, you can get trust in the tool because the user kind of understands what the AI is trying to do. And so that leads to, I think the title of our first podcast was like BIM as a T-Rex. It's like in this case, like TestFit's kind of a T-Rex. You got to like climb on it. You get a couple of parameters that you can flip around, and that thing's going to, ram its head as hard as it can into the problem and see if it can crack it. Right. But you still might have to flex a little bit of the parameters yourself to get to that right product market fit. Product market fit from a real estate development standpoint. Like,
yeah, right.
Does a tower make sense here compared to, podium deal or whatever? So yeah, writing the algorithm, instead of writing the T-Rex, you got to like figure out what's the most effective way to get as far as you can.
That aspect of real time, it's come up here with, people from Enscape who have been on the podcast with you guys, where the element of real time has introduced a way to help make decisions along the way. And it encourages by encouraging the user to play with it, I think, at that point. Because it's like, ooh, it's stretchy. What does that mean? And you're immediately seeing the results. It's not like you stretch it and then walk away and wait like we used to do when we hit the render button, right? Which was, okay, now we're going to wait hours for the rendering to occur. Now it's real time, and we can actually make decisions using that, what used to be a final output tool, as a decision-making design tool along the way. And I think that is a paradigm shift. And so when you're going into, a real estate development company, or you're going into an architecture firm, is that one of the big aha moments? Are people getting that right away?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't take the development guys more than 30 seconds to understand that they can get design information out of a polygon in 10 seconds versus 2 weeks. Like that's the latency issue for them, is like they want to test really crappy sites that they're not going to send to their architects because they're really low, low probability of success, but they still want to test it because it's part of their risk reduction strategy.
Right.
The architecture side, it takes a little bit longer because they want to understand that we've taken time to care about the nuts and bolts of what goes into a multifamily building. And in some cases, we really have done a good job of doing that. High density, for example, it's, the gold standard solver. Like every other solver out there should compare itself to TestFit high density and say, are we doing what this thing does? And even at TestFit, I do that. I'm like, Garden is not as good as that one yet. Like where's the disparity, or why is there a discrepancy? And there's good reasons, like we have 6 years of development on one and the other one we have 3, there's just it takes a while to get these things to be absolutely incredible. But, it's just like with any masterpiece or work of art, like you're not going to build it overnight, it takes a while.
The decade-long overnight success, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It is interesting to think about the real-time aspect of it and the decision-making part of it. And I think one thing that I don't think you've brought it up here, maybe I spaced out for a minute, but like how you marry the pro forma side of things to the visual side of things is a key piece of helping people make decisions, because it's not just what it looks like. It's not just how it environmentally sits on the site. Like you talked about, you bring in a site, it makes a site plan. You can bring in the context of whatever area you're building in and see it in real time, but you're also marrying that to the data output side. I mean, just to kind of round out the product offering here, can you talk a little bit about that and how that enables people to make decisions?
Yeah. So if you think about a building, my mental model is it's like a 3-person tug of war. There's architect on one end that's going to advocate for high, better design. It's got to be a good building. Oftentimes that means it's going to be more expensive, right? So they're going to pull in the direction of, expense. GC, there's another component to the architect in a moment, and I'll talk about that. The GC is going to just talk about the hard cost. It's going to cost you this much. And then the developer is going to talk about the cost, but he's also going to talk about what kind of net income it can bring. And when you work in some of like the best architectural teams, they'll figure out how to equate like an incredible amenity space to, positive on the rent dollars or something. They're putting it in terms that a developer can understand. So, in some cases you'll have an architect that's really talking about how this thing's going to make, money and make the deal work and stuff. So my mental model, you got, 3 kind of competing groups fighting for, this kind of income, expend this kind of thing here, in the way that, the contract structured is, the developer's the owner most of the time. And so he's going to kind of win the argument, but, the good ones respect the architects, in my opinion. I've seen it happen in real time, like where an architect will speak up and the developer will be like, oh yeah, you're right. That's, they put their ego, they keep their ego in check.
Kind of goes back to that idea that we were talking about earlier too, with understanding the spatial quality and the user experience side of things from an architectural point of view, and then weaving that into the future value that the pro forma can or can't say, but you're like, the architect is augmenting that narrative at that point.
Yeah, I mean, practically speaking, in TestFit, we're calculating the size of the building as we go, so we know what that NOI, the net operating income, is going to be, because we know that the developer is going to assume this will be, $2.50 or whatever. The developer's already plugged that information in, and so the goal on the design side is to achieve enough density that the yield on cost, that it's actually worth it to do a project. And right now, what we have in multifamily in the commodity space, it's interest rates are crazy high. You're going to see the multifamily industry slow, if not stop, You're going to see a lot of these commodity markets kind of, grind to a slow, I'm not going to say it's going to stop. It's going to grind really slowly. And the kind of deals that will get done are the ones that are really, really big, because they only want to focus their effort on, a certain size deal that's going to be really big. And they only have so much money to play with. And, so TestFit's product market fit, like we focus in the early days on big buildings, like stuff that capital will continue to build regardless of a recession. So yeah, I mean, you're going to have all of that stuff modeled in the app to sort of show what the trade-offs are. But the way that you read it is it's a yield on cost. It's, this is what this building can make in a year, which isn't really a metric that architects are going to follow.
Right.
What I will say though is the most effective metric that you can use to improve yield on cost is like a building efficiency metric, where you're getting more rentable area than you had previously with the same building.
So that goes back to the algorithm and the feedback that you're incorporating into the model to constantly make that better, which I would think then pushes that idea up higher to, people's awareness at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting to sit in the room where we've got everybody at the table and we do like a charrette with TestFit, and the GC is like, that's going to be way more expensive. And then, developers like add another, everybody's fighting at the kind of operator of the model to flex a thing to,
right.
Like we're going to have terrible views, flip it the other way. And then, then the GC is like, the crane isn't going to fit on that side. We got to flip the tower the other way. And just to see that level of decision-making happen in 15 minutes is absolutely absurd, because I've sat through, email chains where it's like,
oh yeah,
weeks long. And
yeah, totally. That's crazy.
So yes, real time, we are aligned with Enscape. Real time is the future. You respect the user and the ecosystem's time.
And you have an integration with Enscape. So
we do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not just shaded models. You can do rendered real-time walkthroughs as well of TestFit massing and all that kind of cool stuff.
Yes.
So you talked a little bit about funding earlier on, that you're well-funded, but I've been talking to people on your team and they've hinted that there's been a major customer investment that's happened in TestFit.
Yeah. Yeah. The industrial world. So, that market that went from 2% to 8% was industrial. And these are, warehouses. Like, it's so crazy to me, Evan, that I spent 6 years like fighting for this, product to be built for high density multifamily. And, it's a market where nobody has more than like 2 or 3% market share, and it's totally regional. And, that's why the app is, powerful in the way it is. And then when we decided to go look at industrial, it's a market that's kind of new and growing. These are warehouses. Like this is not architect. I mean, some of it's architecture, but like, honestly, like it's, they're located further away from like civilization because, the visitors that go to these buildings are like 18-wheelers, Yeah.
Right.
And okay, so we're kind of learning about this problem, and we have this, supply chain problem in the US too. So, okay, there's kind of a story here. And then we met a venture kind of group that works at Prologis, which is the largest real estate investment trust on the planet. So this is basically a publicly traded real estate fund. So like you can go buy shares of Prologis if you want. And they're deploying, billions of dollars of, money a year to buy these warehouses and build them and develop them. And, so it's really kind of turned into a foundational business for us, like in the same way that our multifamily business is, being foundational. And we've been able to they've been an investor. They're now a customer. And I think their use of the app is absolutely kind of absurd. They've hired, they've got the design team in house, design manager, and all this stuff. It's actually kind of incredible when you look at it. You're like, yeah, I wish we had that in, multifamily, but it's been a real class in like, here's how a publicly traded company functions. And it's been a challenge for us to rise to the occasion. I think we've done quite well. And what you'll see this fall is, I'm sure we're going to talk about it more publicly, but a fair amount of tools that we've built specifically for our enterprise customer Prologis, we are going to release to everybody.
Wow. Cool.
And so, I think we have a webinar in October or something.
Yes, you have a webinar titled "It's Time to Get AI Ready in Real Estate Development." So we can make the call to action for this episode about seeing that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about it.
Yes. So we're gonna talk a little bit more openly, talk a little bit about roadmap. We don't really like to talk about roadmap, so it's going to be a rare opportunity to kind of peek behind some of the curtain at least. But TestFit is going to be cloud enabled is the one thing that I will let y'all know.
Nice. And what does that mean? I mean, what are you willing to say now that might mean to somebody? Because, well, when Kyle was on the episode, we talked and teased a little bit about Rex at that point, and you guys have talked about at that point and since then pieces of TestFit working on the cloud, like the collaboration parts that make sense, especially if people are kind of tying into a model remotely and somebody wants to fiddle with the numbers while somebody else is fiddling with the model and all of those kinds of things. So what does this mean in terms of changes in how TestFit works?
Yeah, so we built everything into a monolithic thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan and I were 25 when we started the company and we started building this monolithic, right? We are 32 now. We've hired people that are way better at all this. They know the right way to architect the stuff, make it, scalable for enterprise, and ultimately to make TestFit a much more powerful, open, more dynamic platform in the long run. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing now is we're kind of unpackaging components of the app that don't really belong in the configurator. And those will be, a component on the web. And one example of that is like pro forma integrations. So, we have an architect running TestFit, and he also has parameters that you can flip to for pro forma. And like, we're just going to create a web page for a developer to access that deal. So you can add his assumptions in real time while they're working on a deal together. So stuff like that, where the sort of real estate execution model that, talks about how we collaborate, as architect, developer, and GC in these early phases, will start to come to fruition.
Nice. So at this webinar for getting AI ready in real estate, who's the target audience for this webinar?
Architects, real estate development, and GCs for sure.
Cool. Yep. All right. So we'll have a link to that. I'm sure you'll have a landing page on your website where people can sign up for that. And they can follow you, Clifton, on LinkedIn. They can go to testfit.io. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want to mention during this Troxel therapy session that you've just attended?
Not really. I mean, look, I think that I've been incredibly blessed to be in this industry for this long and been building TestFit for this long, right? And I just I want to encourage people, you can do this too. We need more startups in AEC. We need more opportunities for VCs to invest. We need, more spin outs from firms that have really cool technology that could be democratized elsewhere. It's not feasible for, TestFit and Hypar to fight for all of the innovation. We need a lot more. And I'm not discounting the literally hundreds of other AEC startups out there. I'm just saying we need more. We need a horde. we need like a blue wave of startups or something, to use a political term.
I was thinking like Lord of the Rings when you said horde. Like I just see this massive crowd simulation, like charging the hills.
Yes. Yeah. So if every BIM manager rage quitted and got together and made like the ultimate, here's how we do it, that kind of thing, I'd be all about that. That would be the kind of insurrection that would get the blood pumping in the firm leadership,
That's a good call to action right there, man. I love it. Well, Clifton, this has been a fun conversation, and I'm so excited about all of the development that I've seen watching from the sidelines over the last few years since we first talked at AU 2018, over a cup of coffee. And just to watch your guys' success, obviously, I'm rooting for you. I'm a big time supporter, and I'm excited about where things are going. So thanks for taking the time to hang out and chat today.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. I've been really encouraged by our relationship.
Thanks, man. Until next time.
Till next time.